Chapter 5. It was 2 days later when my brother Micah brought some personal items, including my other clothes. He entered the warm, darkened room slowly. There were only 2 small openings high up on the walls in the common area that all 3 holding rooms were attached to. These 2 openings were far too small for a person to fit through, but had 2 boards each nailed across to discourage any thought of trying. Each holding cell had a door with an opening cut into the middle large enough to stick your head through. The room I was in was dark, stuffy, and uncomfortable. There was a wooden bench that ran the length of the room and a blanket for sleeping. My brother asked how I was and if I was being properly cared for. His questions sounded rehearsed and he seemed nervous. I asked why he was sent and why it hadn't been Mother. He replied simply, "Father would not allow her to come." After some more rehearsed questions, I dismissed him from the brief visit to ease his great discomfort. I was angry that he couldn't give me more support in my time of need, but more disappointed that my mother had not been allowed to come. She was the only one who could bring me any comfort in this predicament. As I lay down and used the clothes my brother had just brought as a pillow, I made a curious discovery. A secret pocket had been sewn. My mother was the only one I had ever seen sew. Into my spare shirt, and something hard was inside. Inside the pocket were a small piece of flint rock and a small but sharp piece of metal. Reverend Washburn also came to see me the second day, and every day after. He usually spent an hour or more speaking to me about religion, sin, community, and asking me about my views and beliefs. The first 2 meetings I answered everything he asked respectfully, but offered nothing additional and asked no questions of my own. My goal was to present myself as simple and naive. It was clear someone had betrayed me. Nothing he had asked so far clarified who had spoken to him. There were only several people that I had ever spoken critically to about life in Roxbury. The list included my brother, my schoolmates Abel Milton and Jacob Guthrie, and of course Abigail. Each time he left, I thought carefully about what he had asked. The 3rd meeting followed the same routine until he stood up to leave. "Reverend Washburn," I proceeded cautiously as he stopped and turned back to me. "From the questions you have asked, I gather someone has accused me of blasphemy. You have evidence that I have questioned the rules and laws of our colony. I have been forthright with you in my answers, and by now you understand that there is some level of truth to this accusation. I will continue to answer your questions truthfully. However, there is something that troubles me greatly. Everyone knows me, knows I am a gentle soul. Never have I raised a hand to harm a person in our community. Who would accuse me of murder?" He regarded me carefully before he spoke. "Sometimes, my dear boy, our actions start a series of events that spin out of control. A blackened heart can be a powerful device. It can easily become a vessel for both demons and the devil. Even a small sin can be a deadly sin, and both the sinner and their conspirators can be punished, as we have demonstrated in communities throughout history. May God have mercy on your soul and reward you for your honesty in the coming days." He turned away and walked toward the door. He stopped and called over his shoulder silently. "We have word the magistrate is in the town to our north and comes here in 3 days' time." Being held in that cramped holding room day after day had given me plenty of time to think. After Reverend Washburn left, my mind rolled over all of his questions in the previous days. His last statement had also frightened me. It wasn't only his solemn message or hopelessness in his tone and actions. The words he spoke were beginning to create a picture in my head. Blackened heart. Conspirators being punished in a deadly manner. These words began to add up. There was only one person I had shared all of my feelings with about my father and the community we lived in. Abigail was the only person who knew me well enough to paint me as a blackened heart. The vague comments and unanswered questions shared with the others I had suspected could not have led to such accusations. If Abigail told them everything from our secret conversations, they would surely punish me, and the sentence would be a public whipping or worse. The more I thought, the more it all began to make sense. Our last conversation, the sickness sweeping over the community, Abigail's sister passing of the disease, all could have affected her. Could she have felt guilty and somehow blamed herself or even me for her sister's death? Our community leaders were looking for someone to blame. Had Abigail become frightened and offered me up? She may have even done it to save the rest of her family. I felt sick. There was a burning taste coming up my throat into the back of my mouth. My stomach ached as if I had been punched. Deep inside, it was not anger that was consuming me, but heartbreak. Then I thought about how I had stayed close to home for weeks during the sickness. Abigail could not have spoken to me even if she had wanted to. My mind whirled, creating theories of what had occurred in her world. I felt betrayed. Standing in that holding room, staring at the scratched and stained wooden walls brought back all of my memories of whippings and people abused in the stocks or shackles. There was a look of humiliation in their eyes when their own neighbors treated them as outcasts. The screams and shrieks and jeers of the crowd as people were stripped to the waist and whipped publicly. The bloody, oozing welts that appeared as the leather contacted skin. I recalled the furious look in John Wills's eyes as he scanned the crowd in the moments before he was hanged. The silence that spoke of a man who felt he was a sacrifice for a crime he did not commit. Condemned more for the choices he made and failure to comply with the rules than for any crime they had proved. Was I another John Wills? How did Reverend Washburn view me? Did it really matter how this whole situation worked out? My mind was beginning to construct a clear picture. There was a path that the condemned in our community always seemed to walk down, and I was on that path. My future was determined, and it would not end well. My family would be ashamed of me, and Abigail would not be a part of my future even if I survived this ordeal. The first 2 days of my confinement, I had to relieve myself in a bucket that was taken away by Mr. Thatcher and disposed of. By the 3rd day, Mr. Thatcher offered to take me to his outhouse. He likely made this decision due to how cooperative I had been, or because my nerves had wreaked such havoc on my stomach the smell of the waste bucket caused us both discomfort. Thatcher had a home in town. Shortly after the town had been settled, there had been an addition to his home with the holding cells. Trips to the outhouse behind his home became part of my routine after the 3rd day. My nerves and anger by this point had taken away my appetite and made me feel sickly. At dusk the 5th day, I complained to Mr. Thatcher again of stomach pains. I had put on all of my clothes in multiple layers and began to shiver uncontrollably. Thatcher was beginning to look concerned and asked if I needed anything. I asked to go to the outhouse. As we walked out the door, it was still light enough to see, but the sun had already set beyond the western trees. In that same direction was the gap between the 2 trees that led to the stagnant pond, where Abigail had often found me hiding out. The trees were no more than 100 yards away. I walked slowly. Thatcher kept his distance as a result of all the recent sickness in town. Noticing the space between us, I ran. In a zigzag pattern, I ran as fast as I could toward the gap in the trees. There was no doubt in my mind he would chase me rather than shoot. After an initial shocked pause, he began pursuit and screamed for help. His screams gave me a good indication that there was some distance between the 2 of us. When I reached the trees, I didn't slow down. I could envision the path through the thicket and barely slowed to navigate the thorny bushes. The shock of the scene as I burst out of the thicket will be forever etched in my mind. There she was. Abigail sat on a log, with eyes red from crying. The look on her face was one of astonishment when I burst into the clearing. It only took me 7 strides to cross the clearing before I dove headlong into the pond and swam for my life to the other side. And the last step before I hit the water, it seemed as if she smiled. Pulling myself from the murky water on the other side less than a minute later, I turned to see Thatcher just now pulling himself free of the last thorn bushes in the clearing next to Abigail. It was nearly dark, but she clearly mouthed 3 words at that moment, and I'm certain it looked like, "I love you."